making sure that you're targeting the right accounts, because when you become an AE, you get complete happy ears and expect everyone to buy, and that's not the case.
You mean you didn't get into sales for the admin?
You should have a really clear understanding of how you are going to support before you reach out. When you have that notification that someone's opened your email, you should almost be a bit offended if they don't reply.
Welcome to the ISP NextGen Podcast, where we speak to salespeople about their journeys to help you demystify the profession. Now today I am joined by Emily Brown, AE at Reach Desk. Sorry. Emily, thank you very much for joining me. How are you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm all good, thank you. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm very well. I think there's, the seasonal bugs and flus going around, just trying my best not to catch too many of them, I guess.
Yeah, sounds like you're doing well. I've less successful, so we'll
right.
Through.
It's ginger and lemon shots every morning. They're working a treat so far.
Okay, I'll note that down.
Indeed. I'll send you the recipe. Did you want to introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit more?
Yeah, perfect. So I'm Emily. I work at Reach Desk. So I started nearly 3 years ago at Reach Desk, which is pretty wild. But I started as a BDR and worked through different roles, whether that be the enterprise or the emerging space as a BDR. And then I became an AE about this time last year. So I feel very fortunate to have kind of risen through and started at the AE role at the same company. We're very fortunate, got a great team, good products. So yeah, it's been a good ride so far.
And what was it that sort of piqued your interest in a career in sales?
Yeah, so mine was very different to a lot of people because I didn't fall into it. It was very much a conscious decision. So I just finished my master's and I was actually thinking about doing my PhD. And then at the time, my brother was in recruitment and he was saying about, that he was meeting so many people, that he was having so much fun in London, working in the city. And I was there stuck in, different like labs and charities and stuff, working my ass off for kind of different things. And I think I would come back to that when I maybe grow up when I'm older, but I just loved the idea of being in such a fast-paced role, and I love you can make sales what you want it to be, and I loved that autonomy as opposed to like really red tape. So mine was a very conscious step, and my first sales role was in recruitment, and then I went into SaaS sales. So yeah, definitely I think different to other people where they fall into it. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it.
Love that. Yeah, that sort of autonomy and almost instant gratification, you get out what you put in. It's super rewarding and helps to keep you motivated in what is a pretty tough role, I've got to say.
Yes.
Now, were there any challenges that you faced early on in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was I was definitely working hard, not smart. I think when you're at uni or have a part-time job, the better you are is the more time you put in. But I think when I joined recruitment, I was working so hard, but probably really ineffectively. And I was up like all the time, like really burnt out. And I think I just changed that with experience. I think you start to realize what is actually making me money, what's making an impact versus what is me faffing about with admin. So I think that was a really big learn. And I think those are the only things that can come from experience. But yeah, definitely a big shift in the way I thought.
Yeah. You mean you didn't get into sales for the admin?
No, definitely not a strength of mine, I have to say.
Oh, it's perhaps the worst part of the job, gotta say.
Yeah.
Keen to pick your brain on some of the topics that are particularly close to your heart and some of the sort of subject areas that I think do have the biggest impact. You just mentioned about trying to define those roles that were more admin versus high impact revenue generating activities. Now, I wanted to kick things off with ICP development. It is the foundation of any successful sales effort, sales strategy. Really sort of understanding, okay, who is a good customer for us? So what are the key factors or data points that you consider when you're building out your ICP?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's the biggest thing that can make or break your prospecting. And I think understanding like who your ICP is and understanding the data points. So I think the biggest, like your best friend here will be your customer success team, because I think your ICP, who will take a meeting and who will evaluate you versus who will buy you, is very different. I think people love for example, gifting, people love the idea of gifting, but actually, do they have the money to invest in the channel properly? Do they have the people in the team to be able to use this? Do they have the challenges that we can solve? So they might be really interested and might scope us out, but unless they've got all of those three things, they're not in our ICP. Because you could be the best prospector in the world, best salesperson, but if you're supposedly selling to MarTech and you're pitching greengrocers all day, like you're just not going to get anywhere. So I think it's a really, really big thing. So understanding not only who would be interested enough to take a meeting, but it's understanding from your customer success team why people buy you and the biggest value you can bring.
Yeah.
And that just makes your whole life so much easier. It's easier to book a meeting because people are more familiar with what you do and how you can support. And then it's easier through the sales cycle because you'll have the personas in the wider buying committee as well that are familiar with how you can support. So I guess it's the path of least resistance. It's just easier sell internally because people get it, versus if it's something people haven't really done before and not familiar with, it just makes the sales cycle so much longer. So I think the more you can refine your ICP and who buys, the better things will be.
Yeah. It's such a good point, that sort of differentiation between those that will take a meeting and, you know, have the conversation versus those that will actually buy. And you hinted towards that unified go-to-market function, you know, leveraging all the internal resources to find out, you know, why is this customer with us? Why have they stayed with us for this amount of time? What value are we driving there? And then equally with the SDRs, what changes are taking place in the market and how is that going to influence the way we do things? So that's great. Now, I'm sure that transition from SDR, BDR to AE helped to sort of build out that perspective that you have. Are there any sort of personal examples that you've got where you refined your ICP and that led to better results?
Yeah, I definitely had a broader understanding of what our ICP was when I was trying to book meetings as a BDR. But I think that the biggest example is that I went from BDR to AE working in the commercial segment. So for us, that's 200 employees and below. Yeah. And when I first joined, I'd, listened to all the podcasts, like spoke to loads of AEs, and I knew what was important. And something that people kept saying was making sure that you're targeting the right accounts, because when you become an AE, you get complete happy ears and expect everyone to buy, and that's not the case. So I was hyper vigilant about the accounts that I was working. And actually they ended up closing at a good rate for kind of almost double the ACV that had typically been in the commercial segment. And it's not because I'm some absolute, sales unicorn. It's just because they were the right people to target and they had the money, resources to be able to buy what we sell. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest, I guess, personal experience of kind of doing it firsthand and seeing them come in and the ACVs that they did.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point. It not only influences the type of conversation, it influences the velocity of that deal. It influences what that deal is going to close for. Really interesting stuff. How do you balance the need for that well-defined ICP that's going to close faster and at a higher value versus being open to new opportunities and potential new use cases?
This is really, really topical at the moment. And I think it's really hard. And I think there's no right answer. And I also think it depends on how big your target market is, because if you could sell to loads of people, maybe there's less need to step out of that ICP. But if you've got a really small niche where maybe you feel like it's a little bit saturated, maybe that's when it's more relevant to step out. But I think it's understanding when someone can buy and can't buy. So maybe a company might have the use cases and the pain and the people, but maybe they just have no money and can't buy it. So it depends if the step outside of ICP is maybe a different use case which you can work with, or is it that there would be no one to own this project? So I think it's just identifying quickly as well, and not having them later stages in your pipeline, and understanding if they can actually buy or they just think it would be cool.
Now, once you have that well-defined ICP, next step, of course, is actually identifying, okay, who within that account do I need to speak to? Who's this going to influence? Who's going to own it, as you mentioned? Which is where sort of you get a bit more precise, and there's different strategies and tactics you can employ. Are there any tools or techniques that you typically turn to when trying to identify the right targets within your ICP?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends on what tools you have available as well. So if you're fortunate enough to have the likes of 6sense, ZoomInfo, and have that intent, I think those are excellent to lean on.
Yeah.
But there's also free tools as well if you're maybe at an earlier stage startup, like on setting alerts for funding, for example, setting hiring alerts. So I think really simplified, it's who do you feel like you've got the biggest reason to reach out to? I think you should have a really clear understanding of how you are going to support before you reach out.
Yeah.
I think people get prospects do all day, every day with persona-led messaging. And I don't disagree with it, but we would be able to solve your pipeline challenges, but then there are other things could as well. So it's why would you buy us versus other things? And I think being really research-led and understanding exactly how you can support is the best way to go about it. So being super personalized to the accounts where they're showing the right signals. And then for me, because I work with smaller accounts, going straight to the decision maker, if you've got good outreach, there's no reason why they wouldn't reply. But of course, appreciate enterprise is a different kettle of fish, and it might be a little bit more internal digging. But just using the intent and the signals that you have available.
Yeah, you made a really, really good point there. I think it's so easy for us to just think about our direct competitors as our only competitors, when in reality, there's all these other categories and types of solutions to that same problem that we're also competing against, as well as a list of priorities for our buyer that they need to try and solve and that are competing. So it's really about, as you said, getting the timing right, getting that trigger, and then being as relevant as possible. So I love that. Now, in terms of segmenting and prioritizing off the back of that, are there any methods that you typically employ outside of, perhaps when there's not the intent, when there's not the triggers? Are there any other sort of prioritization techniques that you use?
Yeah. I think in terms of prioritization, I think if you have a list of accounts that you really want to win, I don't think that's just an enterprise play. I think knowing who is likely to buy and nurturing them as well. I think people aren't always in the buying window, but if from the data that you've got from the CS team, etc., they're very likely to buy. I think in terms of prioritization, it's just keeping those nurtured. Like I've had so many examples of where I reached out to someone when I was first becoming AE about a year ago, put them in nurtures, maybe popped a LinkedIn message when I see something come up. And they just randomly come up to me and said, oh, one of your customers sent us a voucher, and actually now we think it would be a really good idea.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff you can't control in your sales process, which is, of course, very frustrating. But if you're working the right accounts and keeping them nurtured, then the signals are already there. It's just waiting for the internal magic and someone to say the right thing, and then they come to you.
Yeah.
So I think it's just nurture touch points of good fit accounts, really.
Yeah, there's so much that goes on behind closed doors, in, networking groups, Slack channels that we just have no idea about. And, I'm sure there's sales ops and marketing teams all trying to figure out how to attribute that sort of in-person off digital activity. Now, you touched on, sometimes, especially when you're in a new role, perhaps at a new company, you're still sort of trying to find your feet, getting the hang or getting to grips with the messaging, the pains, the solution. Typically leads to a bit of trial and error, some mistakes along the way. Of course, we all make them. There's some particular blunders that I'd rather not share. But are there any common mistakes that you see when people are reaching out and trying to target prospects, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistakes always come when it's at scale. And I think everybody's done their hello first name. I don't think you are allowed to be in sales unless you've done that mistake.
It's a rite of passage.
Yeah, exactly. I think you've entered the game once you've done that. I think that's the biggest mistake is just trying to reach everyone and completely hit and hope. Maybe people are just way more organized than me, but I think that's when you typically start to, send emails to people that are already in pipeline, or send emails to people that have said no a week ago. Yeah. So I think you can do all of the the Salesforce fields about exclude this customer, but nobody's got excellent, nobody's Salesforce is 100% true, and that's the fault of us salespeople, I'm sure. Yeah. But when you try to do the one to scale, when it's supposed to be targeted prospecting as opposed to educational nurture, I think that's when there's quite a big room for error.
Indeed. Yeah, no, completely agree. So it sounds like that prep ahead of time in terms of organising your week so that, you're not having to revert to a mass setting.
Rambling, yeah.
Literally. Now, we're going to dive into prospecting, some of the finer details, but before we do, wanted to have a bit of fun. What is the biggest prospecting blunder that you've made?
So many. No, this is really embarrassing, but I'm going to be honest. So when I was a BDR, I went to an event and, you're feeling good. And I asked the marketing person, she came over. She looked at me funny, and then we were speaking for like 10 minutes, and I was, pitching all about Reach Desk. It was going really well. And then she looked at me and she was like, we've spoken before. She was like, we spoke on LinkedIn, and then I was a BDR at the time, and I'd been on the demo about 2 months before, and I just completely blanked that she knew Reach Desk.
Yeah.
I hope my manager's not listening to this. But I was normally so good at faces and remembering people, and I just didn't know what to say. So I'd pitched her pretending that I didn't know her, and she was just like, yeah, we've spoken. But obviously live at an event, like face to face, like a meter away, I just felt, that was pretty embarrassing. I was with a few of my team. We walked away and were like,
just wanting the ground to open up and swallow.
Yeah, exactly. Got straight on the DRL after that.
Oh, brilliant. Moving into prospecting, it's the lifeblood of any sales organization. Yet it is one of the most challenging parts of the job. So in terms of what you're seeing that is standing out in the crowded, saturated landscape that our buyers operate in, what are you seeing so far? What's working for you? Yeah,
I think for me, email still works. I think that's probably quite an unpopular opinion, but what works well for me specifically is I will personalize if I can on an account level and on a personal level. I think there's so much boring prospecting going on. And like I said, you're not competing just with your competitors. You're competing, if we want to increase pipeline generation, we're competing with people pitching BDR hiring, lead generation agencies,
training,
power dialers, training. Like, I think we're quite naive to what we're competing against. And it's all going to be quite boring and using the same hook and triggers like you are, hiring in your sales team. So obviously you're increasing your pipeline goals. So people have different opinions on this, but I think having a little bit of fun, and if you know that they're a real foodie, maybe throwing a few puns in there, but making it a really good email.
Yeah.
But making it also relevant as well. So if you can tie those two things in together, I think you want to gain a little bit of respect from your prospect and they know that you've put the effort in.
Yeah.
That works really well. And I think engaging the buying committee as opposed to one or two people, because I don't think anyone, just one person buys a software in a company. I think now it's got like minimum 5 people get involved. So I think from more of to help you down the line, just even people being aware of your name, sending something on LinkedIn, recommending a podcast that might not even be your content of the company, just good engagement to like the account level. And I think when you have that notification that someone's opened your email, you should almost be a bit offended if they don't reply. Your email should be that personalized and that relevant. So just very good outreach as much as you can do.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think, yes, relevance comes first, but secondly, you do need to lean into the cringe a little bit and have fun with it, because otherwise it can be such a monotonous job if you're just mass sending or sending out the same message. There's no fun in that. Yeah,
I think people are still human as well. I think we all get messages from recruiters, for example, or, people trying to sell us stuff. And actually it's very similar. So the ones that we would probably reply to are the ones that are relevant and relevant, personalized, and maybe a little bit different as opposed to the very standard sales template.
Yeah, indeed. Now, on that point, we've spoken about if the email's opened, we would be offended if there's no response. However, getting those opens, getting those responses, it's tough. There's a lot of other rejection further into the sales cycle. How do you maintain consistency and motivation when you are faced with rejection throughout the process?
Yeah, I think it's taking a step back. I think the chances of a company being in the buying cycle at the time you reach out are really slim. And knowing that 95% of people are going to say no and accepting that. And the more, this is such a cringe sales thing to say, but the more no's you get, the more yeses you're going to get, because if you're reaching out to the right people, you're getting closer and closer to finding those people that are in the buying cycle. So I think accepting that that's the case. And I think when people send 10 LinkedIn messages or 10 emails, they don't get a reply. If one reply, that's a 10% reply rate. That would be really high. So it's understanding that this is a really tough job, and actually I think grounding yourself of what good looks like and not expecting everyone to reply to your email is a good way to kind of handle that rejection.
Yeah.
And then I think with consistency, I'm actually trying something new that's a little bit rogue, but the most consistent thing I do in my day is my Duolingo.
Okay.
So what I've done is I've downloaded a habit tracker that does like streaks. So I have one for like getting a connect, for sending X amount of emails, etc. And that's what's keeping me consistent. And it's really small metrics. I'm not, kind of overstretching it. It's really achievable. But I think if you're prospecting every day, then you can't go too far wrong.
Yeah. So sort of like gamifying the activity. That's really cool. You're going to have to send me the link to that habit tracker or the app that you're using.
Wow. Because the only person I listen to is that angry green bird from Duolingo. That is the only thing that makes me do something every day. And I was like, how can I tie these two together? So yeah, a bit of a weird hack, but feel free to steal it.
Love it. No, that's great. That's great. So you touched there on creating the right message, the visibility, right, over the data. That's super helpful because that will give you a steer as to what's working, where can I make changes to improve that message, to improve that outreach that I'm doing. Do you have any sort of go-to frameworks or strategies that you use when you are crafting outreach messaging?
Yeah, I think for messaging, because I'll personalize from an account perspective and a hobby perspective, the first line will say, as an avid X enthusiast, want to add some puns into this email. And then I will say, given your insight hook and trigger, sounds like X might be a priority. Reach Desk does direct mail and gifting. If you're interested in a chat, send are you free later in the week? But
yeah,
I'm trying not to say any of my cringe stuff of personalization, but I will.
No, we want that. We want that.
I'll add puns about the hobby or whatever I found about it in the email.
Yeah.
Because it's just fun. It's just different. I think people are bored. I spoke about Zalo, but people are bored of outreach. So I think short is the key thing. Really personalized. But then also having that I have looked into your account and I'm not just doing some random email about or something like that.
Yeah, indeed. I love that. And then last question of the section, what is one tip that you'd give to someone that is struggling to convert prospects to engaged leads?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the things that we've spoken about in terms of if you're getting no responses, are you reaching out to the right people? Because your outreach can be really great, but if people aren't interested, they're very unlikely to reply if it's completely outside of their role or the scope. Yeah. And then the second thing would be, I guess, being very honest. If you received this email, would you reply? And not having the vanity activity metrics. So just kind of holding yourself accountable to, is this good outreach? Would I be happy for my sales leader to see this?
Yeah.
So those two things.
Yeah, I love that. I'd add as well, if you can, leverage your team or leverage a community, find like an accountability partner. We spoke about your run club, which is a great way for people to come together, but it also is a way to keep yourself accountable through others, right? So use other people, ask for their feedback, just chuck something over and see what they think.
100%. I think competition gets us all right. I think you need one person, whether it's internal or external, that you just want to get one more connect with and like a friendly competition, I think is so powerful. Get someone else that's equally as competitive. I think that's a great shout. Nice.
I love that. Emily, that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a super insightful session.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries. It's been a pleasure. If any of our listeners do want to reach out, I guess LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Yeah, just search for Emily Brown. I'd probably look at Reach Desk as well because there are billions of Emily Browns in the world. It's a very common name. That's the perfect place to find me.
Brilliant. I'll also put your LinkedIn profile link in the description of the podcast. Thank you again, Emily, and to everyone listening, until next time. Next week on the ISP NextGen Podcast.
You need to accept that no one's coming to save you. You are your own savior. I was basically negotiating with old school German buyers. They really made it a difficult time for me. Whatever the goal is for that day, I asked myself, did X action bring me closer to achieving that goal? And if the answer is no, then I just wasted my time.